Okay, I'm going to start a new series here that's about world floods and mythology around the world about the ancient floods. Some of them in elder times, other ones passed down, folklore, odd stories, things like that. I'm not going to do it today, but I want to give this as kind of a lead in for that and a few other stories that I'm working on. But I've compiled about 70 of myths around the world, and a few of them correlate with each other. And indeed, now I've found a site that has over 200. And so I'm going to use a correlation and show you. Each video will be out of a certain area where it'll show you they have common themes. And as it changes through different areas, you'll notice how different areas have slightly different themes or variations on a theme. Also, you might every once in a while find an anomaly where way over here these people have the same story as over there, whereas all in between and surrounding them do not. And it kind of shows you where they perhaps got their story from, or trade routes brought it to them. A lot of things could have brought it to them, but I digress. But I just want to give you a heads up, and this is kind of a primer, as you say, to that type of thought. This is North America, and looking at this picture, it kind of looks weird. The outline of it looks a little odd. You can easily make it out, especially with the Great Lakes and things, and the black outline shown there. But the red outline that you see is how low the sea level was at the last ice age, and how much extra land that we had gained. Now you can see the blue that's behind that, like looking at Florida and where Orlando here is, and the tongue sticks down, and everybody's very familiar with that. Well, this is what it looks like now, and it was this wide at this time. This is going up a little over 120 meters, and by doing so, it really inundates all of this, but then and gets the whole shelf here going. If we went down further, it would just keep getting wider and wider. And actually, we're not but 45 foot from having all of these little islands over here all connect all of this. And Bimini is in there. And I'm going to show you something about Bimini here in a minute. You know, people talk about Bimini being Atlantis, but I'm going to show you some thoughts on that. I also want you to note that whenever it had the continental shelf here, you can see how it's built. And here it looks like there's just a whole lot of sludge runoff. Like what would have been Louisiana is just gone burp. Well, that's Louisiana going burp. What is all this? Well, I'll get to that with the flood story that we have going on here. And it's perhaps the deluge that we're all hearing about in the North American form. Something to point out here, though, too, is that whenever you see this blue and cut in line right here, this is the future coastline, supposedly, if all the ice on the world was to melt. That's what it would do. And indeed, I live up here in Texas, and not too far from here you can find shark's teeth and so on, and we're at a higher elevation. It drops down, going down through here. Houston would no longer exist. Orlando, nothing on the eastern seaboard. New York, none of these places exist anymore. Looking at California, the Baja Peninsula would have been just inundated to a toothpick. The California Gulf here pinches in. Los Angeles is gone, and that's why we went up to the 122 meters on the constant. And or that's the reason this picture is chose, is because it shows you that level. And it would go past that level, by the way, if we had all the ice to melt, you know, and the Himalayas and just everything, and it all settled in the ocean. But then we have up here, too, in the northwest, where it's inundated through these mountains. Forget this is not the Sierras, but it inundates into here and causes a giant lake. And then up north, you can also see, we're up near Portland and the edge up there, it's really torn it up. One thing to note here, I don't know if you can see it, but you see these little veiny lines that are all through here? look kind of like canyon lands, and yeah, it definitely does. But the reason it looks so canyon lands is because the amount of water that has run through these things and eroded it down in ancient times. And you notice how above me, God, it's not going to let my pointer set, but right above me here now, how it gets smooth and there's these channels. God, there's these channels here where you can see a large amount of water has run down and into these areas, right? And of course, this makes the Mississippi that runs through there. I'm sorry, this makes the Mississippi that runs through there. But, Memphis would be even underwater. Memphis now become a delta, kind of like it is in Egypt. But strange that it would lose all this ground, but look at how much ground it gained out of the last ice age. And everybody keeps talking about global warming and if all the ice melted, but if you look at the clock of recorded ice ages, in the next 3,000 to 4,000 years, we're supposed to have another one. We're already hitting on the edge of when it should do it, and when it does it quite rapidly and just drops. And so while we're sitting around talking about global warming, it might flip-flop on you real quick. In fact, it seems like this thermal maximum ends up flip-flopping real quick into a glacial maximum, and it's the natural cooling of the planet. Perhaps as you get more and more water going on, there's enough cooling effect and it cools off the planet. What's staving it off this time and spiking it slightly more is that we have much more desert in the earth because we've taken a lot of the vegetation out of the central band where everybody was living whenever it was the only inhabitable area. And a lot of the trees and forest and all the Lebanon cedars and things and all from that side of the world, and indeed it happened here, but due to a catastrophe that we're talking about that caused the Great Lakes, all of the top half of this picture right here would all be inundated. Above my pointer right now would all be inundated with a giant ice sheet that was up to 2 miles thick, and it seems to have melted extremely rapidly. Now, the show today is on the Bimini Road and its connection to this and how it could be possible. Academia is wrote it off just like they have the Yonaguni crater or the Yonaguni monument, and which is again about this same depth, and it even looks much more fancy to me whenever you really look at it than this is. Yet this shows a wall and a primordial harbor. And where we're at here is right off North Bimini Islands, not far off the Florida coast. And you find these symmetrical perpendicular stones that are all lined up. And it looks like a toppled down wall, perhaps, an ancient wall. You can see this grid pattern that's run through here. And it's quite wide. It begins and ends and runs for many football fields, turns in a slight J pattern. There are different sizes of these, but they're somewhat symmetrical in size. Areas are made out of small pillows like this and giant blocks like you saw before. Now, we're not that deep up under the water, 60 to 80 foot at the most depth that there is, and a lot of it you can snorkel down to at the first part of it. And each one of these are symmetrical and cut out and quite squared off. Here's a terrible dive video showing you a piece of it. But whenever we get a chance to look at it from off the shore, you can see parts of it that look like little jetties in old time. And here is what the structure somewhat looks like, right? And you can see that it has a gouge cut into it here, and then this giant harbor area, and what seems to be a primordial seawall that would have been only exposed 10,500 years ago before this last ice age set in, melted away extremely rapidly. Now, could this have been broken through in times? Well, there's really not many rocks, if any, in here at all. And so it looks like there's a seawall and a protected harbor they've got and a big plank, and it runs on into inland, and then there was another protected harbor you could pull your boats into and come in and line up. And each one of these is calibrated on a computer and grids out to look incredibly like a wall, and a dual wall. And in here, it's just it's uncanny, how the shape of this doesn't allow you to think. And of course, modern Whackademia isn't going to let anybody say that there were people in America before the last ice age, and the only way this is exposed is during the glacial maximum of the last ice age. And of course, people coming down here with some Clovis points aren't going to be able to build something like this. And so they have to write it off. Indeed, some of the people that have tried to not write it off have been written off for that fact. And I think that's kind of disgusting too. But this would have been exposed during the last glacial maximum easily, and is only exposed by us seeing it in a modern day. It was only found in the 70s, and oddly, Edgar Casey, an old prophetic guy that would give you future predictions, kind of a modern day Nostradamus, if you will, the sleeping Nostradamus, said that somewhere out here in Florida they would find the remnants of the lost city of Atlantis. Well, I'm not saying this is Atlantis, but I am telling you this was a primordial harbor, and you can see how deep this is. It's not but 35 foot deep, running out this whole jetty line here till it comes out to the deeper inset harbor and where the seawall was. And if we're going 120 meters and these people are only getting out to 80 meters, it was a 40-foot tall wall at that time of a seawall. Right? Now, some of the effects here are quite worn in, and you can imagine over time with the sand grating on them how worn in they would be. Other structures, you can see circular patterns here. They said that they're like little stone hinges that are set about in this. There are stones that are set up on other stones. There are pieces of cylinders that are out there in the water. There are planks and squares. Now you see this square right here that's found clearly on there. You can see this square here. I mean, it's quite the squared off piece that he's even pointing out. You can see this one here, and their only answer is this was some rock that was on maybe some shipwreck of some Spaniard thing, but it wasn't from primordial times. This was put later. And I could see how that's an easy out for it, but there's no signs of a shipwreck right there. I mean, they're not finding the doubloons or anything there. They tried. Of course, once they found this thing, they're like, ha ha, woo. Because the old story is that this area was so flat and so shallow that there was little bommies, little coral bommies that stick up, and it would take out your pirate ship, get you leaking, and you would go aground someplace, and you would not hit shore with it. And so not far offshore, pirate ships would just rot out with all their booty inside of them. You had to have people go out and try to get it back out of them, all these things. Stories come out of that. I could tell you stories. But so this Bimini Road that seems to be just deliberately hidden by Whackademia here off of Bimini Island, just off the edge of Florida, on that shallow that you see in there with all these pillow-shaped rocks, which they call it a Bimini Wall or a Bimini Road, and Bimini Road is more appropriate. And where does it lead? And they say, well, it's just out in the water and it doesn't lead anywhere and it's got to be a natural form. But I'm telling you, it leads to the shoreline of 10,500, 10,800 years ago, where these people, who you can call Atlanteans if you want to, built this giant place. Look at this squared off form right here. And this is a slab that they say was just, no, there's two and then one. It's laid out like bricks. People have said, is it the lost city of Atlantis? And again, they even say it on the tourist diving for here. I dove right near there before. I didn't dive on it itself because it was another $200 to dive on the thing. for some stupid permit they had going on that even the dive master was a little pissed off about. But in our talk about it when we were going out, I definitely remember him saying that it would have been exposed at the last ice age, but Whackademia can't go for that idea. Now, one of the first artists that was through there, his original findings were that it had to have been built, and it seems to be a construction. And you see him change his mind real quick whenever all his papers come out, like somebody had talked to him and said, if you want to continue, you need to change your tune. And I find all this evidence to be, I don't know, as the guy says that I took some of this video from, I find it quite compelling. And when would this be exposed? Well, we talked about the asteroid impacts that run across from Carolinas up into Michigan and even into Canada, but they disappear going into Canada. Why? Because, well, Michigan and above was under 2 miles of ice. It hit into ice. Once that ice cube melted, you're not going to see it. Once it melted rapidly, those ice cubes, it caused a giant flood that filled up. And indeed, where you saw Texas and that sludge coming down is from all the silt washing down south and finding its way. And it gouged a large area in the earth. We'll look at the Grand Canyon. We'll look at places in Utah, places in Michigan, and a few others in this flood series. Also, I have coming up the flood stories. So, like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy, guys. But the Bimini Road, was it Atlantis? No. Was it the harbor of Atlantis? Perhaps, but we don't find a structure that it could have been. We don't find the circular things and so on that it would have been attached to. It just looks like it was attached to mainland. Who built it? That's the question.